chance to dig really into condo life, but I'm sure she would.
All right, good morning. I think we're ready to start. We had to do a Google Meet with Dr. LaCava and Mark Mitchell, and I know Assistant Chief Weiner is there. We're trying to keep as few people in the room as possible, but there's some issues that we've had to have some of our team be virtual today. So we're going to have it on virtual. And then Mr. Burke, I'm going to turn it over to him. He's got a presentation for you on the budget, unless there's something you'd like to talk about first.
We could do that first. That's fine. And
Okay.
then we just had a few tweaks to our proposals, and I gave you kind of an outline on where we
Okay.
stand on your proposals, knowing that those aren't TAs, but those are just kind of our initial thoughts.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good to go?
Good to go.
All right, well, good morning. I've got the presentation over my shoulder here on the big screen. Hopefully you can see past my big old head. I'm not blocking your view. But we did, as we talked about the last session, we said, we'd come back and give you a little update on, the district's budget situation. So I put some slides together. I'll run through them. If you have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. Oh, okay. So, this school year, we were concerned. We weren't sure if we were going to experience a budget cut mid-year. When the pandemic hit us last March, and we were very concerned that the impact on the state budget would make its way down to the school districts at some point soon. The good news was that the Governor DeSantis and Commissioner Corcoran really held true to their commitment to protect education funding for the current school year. And there was a series of executive orders that were put out by the governor to respond to the pandemic. A couple of them, Executive Orders 6 and 7, were key to education funding, and they basically held us harmless this school year, even though our enrollment had slipped over 7,000 kids. So we're down over 7,000 students. Normally, we're funded on a per-student basis, and the state adjusts us to actual enrollment in October and February through those FTE surveys, and whoever the number of kids we serve, that's what we're paid for. This year was very unique in that although we were down over 7,300 students, the state maintained our funding, and otherwise we would have lost about $60 million. So had it not been for these executive orders, we probably wouldn't be even talking about salaries with any of our employee groups this year, because we would have been in a pretty big budget hole. So that was the good news. That hold harmless, along with the governor's budget this current school year, included $500 million for teacher pay to raise his teaching starting salaries, and there was some money left over for veteran pays. And I would say those two things are really what allowed us to really talk about a raise this year for our employees, because at the onset of the year, I wasn't think we'd even be having these conversations. So that was really important. The enrollment, I just want to speak to that a little bit more, because although we were held harmless this year on the enrollment, there's no expectation that'll continue for next year. And the enrollment loss was significant. In just this 1 year, we've lost over 10 years of growth. That we had been in a nice upward. You can see the chart here. It goes back many years, back to 2002. But if you look at the recent, we had a little downturn in enrollment during the Great Recession, which was painful. And then in recent years, we've had a nice kind of steady growth. Some of that in our charter schools, but some of it in our district schools as well. And from a financial perspective, it's much better to be in a growth mode. When you're adding students, you're adding revenue. And of course, you've got to serve those students, but sometimes you end up benefiting a little bit, because the kids don't come to us in neat blocks of 18 or 22 or 25. And if you pick up some students and you're able to serve them with roughly the same number of staff, it brings a little more revenue and flexibility into the budget. Now, the reverse of that is what we're now experiencing, is a decline in enrollment. And when there's a decline in enrollment, you lose all the revenue with those kids, but you have a harder time reducing the cost, kind of in lockstep with the enrollment. So you may lose, 15 kids from a school spread across multiple grade levels and not pull back any teacher positions, or you don't pull back a school resource officer, because you got to have a police officer in every school. So the declining enrollment is for any school district, that really puts a wrench into your budget plans, and we will be dealing with that next school year. The enrollment picks back up, though. Right, so that's the million-dollar question, how many of the students do we expect to get back? There's a lot of effort going on to try to re-engage. We've got people calling families. We've dug into that 7,300 kids. A good number have gone to home education, where the parents have become the teacher. Some have gone to a lesser extent, some have gone to private schools, charter schools. Unfortunately, some kids just kind of dropped off the radar, and we couldn't find them enrolled in any school. And so that was the immediate focus. So we've got social workers and some of our staff that are working evenings from 4 to 8 p.m. just trying to contact these families, and they're having some success. I believe they've re-enrolled about 800 kids. We've had other students that left the county, or they left the state, or they left the country. So it's a mix of things, and we're not really sure exactly how many of those students we're going to get back. And that's what the state is forecasting now, and they've asked for our input because this is playing out across 67 counties, and this loss of enrollment is not unique to Palm Beach. It's statewide, and it's actually nationwide. But our whole funding formula is based on enrollment, so it's important that the state have a good forecast, because otherwise they may if we under-project and we get more kids than expected, once the legislature approves the budget, they approve a fixed amount. So let's say it's roughly $22 billion. If we get surprised and all the kids come back next year, the state would just have to basically spread that $22 billion over more students, so they reduce the amount per student. So that's why we want to help them try to get it right. I don't think we're going to see all of our enrollment come back. I think some of if families have gone to private school, they may be happy with that. Some people may like the virtual education or the home education, but we're going to be actively working on this right up until August. You're going to see more marketing, and there'll be more, our school staff will be getting engaged and just reaching out to families, because we really do believe kids are best served within our district. And it's a great question, because that's something we're going to be sweating out a little bit as we go into next school year.
What's like the percentage in lost enrollment of actual students, do you know?
Yeah, so we almost lost 4% of our enrollment.
4%?
Yep.
Will they continue with the building in the new schools then?
Yes, a lot of those projects are pretty well underway, and most of the schools we're building are we're replacing older facilities. So we've got a new high school in the works and a new middle school. We're still forging ahead with those. And we look at it, we built a school the last 50 years, so hopefully the long term, we get past COVID-19 and our enrollment begins to pick back up. This cost of COVID slide I put in here, this has been of interest to a lot of people. How much is it costing us to run our schools in this environment? And we did receive about $40 million from the federal government through the first round of CARES Act stimulus last March of 2020. We've spent all that money. You'll see there's about $5.4 million left of that 40, but that's the share that goes to charter schools and private schools. And when we really look at the true cost of COVID, it goes well beyond what the federal dollars covered. And it hit us in a variety of ways. So we estimate that we really are going to have about another $73 million in either lost revenue or cost beyond that federal funding this year. We've enhanced cleaning. We're buying PPE, and we had to buy $25 million in computers. Now, that came out of our capital budget, but still, that was a hefty investment to buy over 80,000 computers so we could get to a 1-to-1 student-to-device ratio, which would allow for the remote learning to occur. We also started paying for internet services for those families that couldn't afford it. So the board's going to spend probably about $1.5 million to cover that. So we've provided hotspots and Comcast accounts to students that are it just became critically important. When we first pivoted to online instruction, we found that about 15% of our kids just didn't seem to have access. So that was something we had to address.
The county the district doesn't get reimbursed at all from the government or state? feds or the state level?
No, sir. One good thing we have going, and it's a work in progress, and it's going to pay great dividends down the road, but the county government, they receive their own CARES Act dollars, and they've dedicated about $10 million to a county Wi-Fi project that we're partnering with, and where they're putting up antennas in neighborhoods that are kind of underserved, where internet access is a challenge. And we're even putting some antennas up in our school buildings. And once that infrastructure is in place, And the county's able to leverage some of their existing infrastructure. They have like fiber networks, I guess, throughout the whole county. But then what it allows us to do is we can buy these Wi-Fi extenders, and it's a kind of a small device, looks like a cell phone or whatever, but you can send that home with the student, and then they'll be able to tap into this free Wi-Fi that the county project will provide. So that's part of a longer-term strategy, because internet access, or this digital divide, it's a long-standing issue. Even if COVID wasn't here, it's still an issue when it comes to kids that need to do homework or whatever. It's just become, it's an advantage for those students that have it at home and a disadvantage for those that don't. So that's something that will stick with us past COVID. But anyway, the county's been a good partner there. That's a pretty hefty investment they're making. And then school food services, they've had a tough year. That team has worked harder than ever to feed the community. You guys were out there helping provide security, when they were doing the drive-up, grab-and-go meals for the community. And they've done everything they can to keep the meals flowing, right? They're sending meals home on weekends with students, and over holiday breaks, they did like 2 weeks worth of meals over the winter break. But even with all that, their meal participation is down. Because we still, we have 48% of our kids in online learning, and they're just not, going to the cafeteria like the old days. So food services budget is based on the meals served, and most of it comes through federal reimbursement. So their revenue's down. And even though they've scaled back on staffing and they've cut back on the temporary employees they normally use, they're going to lose about $10 million this year from their fund balance. And we've picked up in the general fund about $4 million worth of costs that they used to pay for. They used to chip in on the custodians, and they used to provide the lunchroom monitors or the cafeteria aides. And they couldn't really afford to carry that this year, and we knew it was important to the schools because now they've got to socially distance when they eat and all that. So we picked that up in the general fund. And then just a couple programs that are hurting because of COVID, our after-school program. That's a fee-based program where parents and our employees that take advantage of it, they're paying a fee to have their kids, that child care after school hours. Our participation's down, so the revenue's down. But we do need to keep those programs running because they're of vital importance to the families that need the child care. But we're losing like economies of scale, and we're serving fewer kids, and it's just it's having a negative budget impact on those programs. That and our pre-K program's kind of the same thing, along with facility rental. When we lease out our space, that hurts. The schools get revenue and the district gets a share, so we're hurting on that front too. So now, the legislature will start their session next week on March 1st, and we're anxious to see what they're going to do to education funding. This slide I used with the board a little while back, but it still holds true. The state is dealing with a reported $2 billion shortfall in their budget, and that's within their general revenue budget. And, the general revenue is what funds education, a big chunk of our budget. So the state's got a $2 billion hole in general revenue, and K-12 education represents about 37% of that budget. So we're concerned that, we're going to feel, potentially 37% of that hit. And we don't know. I mean, there were some quotes. We're trying to pay attention to what the leaders in Tallahassee are saying. The Senate President, Simpson had said, look, just like the district worries about their credit rating, so does the state. And that they basically, when the revenues are down, they have to reduce spending, because if they don't, they'll be penalized with a credit rating downgrade, which then kind of creates other budget challenges for the state in terms of borrowing money. They do, there has been things about saying, look, we're going to make investments in the Everglades and our most valuable, our most vulnerable children, so that's good to hear. Again, I do want to thank the governor and Commissioner Corcoran for truly protecting us this current school year. I just don't think the legislature, though, is going to be able to get away without making some type of reduction unless the economy continues to rapidly improve. Just real quick, and you guys probably know most of this, but education in Florida is funded by two main sources. It's the state sales tax, the 6% that's issued statewide. That's the main source of state general revenue. And then it's local property taxes. The property taxes, and the state formula basically provides, they'll set an amount per student. And it varies based on the program you're in. If an ESE student or ELL student will generate more. But On average, they fund about $8,000 per student, and that's a mix of state and local dollars. And the way the formula works is the state actually tells our school board what property tax rate to levy. It's called the required local effort. And they use this formula statewide to kind of equalize funding so that everyone's getting roughly that same $8,000 per student. There's some adjustment for cost of living, which helps us here in Palm Beach, but the formula is designed to be equitable across the state, which means if you had the benefit of living in like a place where property values are high and there's a strong tax base, you don't necessarily feel that in your operating revenues because they kind of smooth it out across the state so that if you're in a more rural county where they don't have a lot of property values, mostly agricultural, they'll get a bigger dose of state money to make up for the missing local dollars. And in Palm Beach County, we're about 70% local and 30% state. And that plays out depending on the county's basically property values. And so we were sharing some of this with the board. We're trying to figure out, well, how bad is it with sales tax collections? I can tell you, like in April and May, right after the shutdown, sales tax collections plummeted, and you see that in these line charts. And then, we had some really down months, but there was kind of a bounce back. And if you look at the line chart on the top right corner, that's Palm Beach County's collections alone. So you see that, the dramatic drop, and then we kind of jump back up. In the lower left corner is Orange County, and everyone's paying attention to Orange County because of, the tourism and Disney World and the theme parks and the hotels. Their tax collections remain down about 32%, whereas Palm Beach's have kind of come back. And then the upper left corner is just statewide. And you can see it's come back, but not all the way back. And tourism's still hurting. The cruise ships aren't running. But what's been interesting is we've seen like a shift in sales tax. So with the COVID-19, restaurants and bars and dry cleaners and things like that have dropped down. And then people were actually saving more money than typically for a while. And then I think people have now started spending money, and car sales are up, like home improvements, appliances. They're buying more. So there's been a shift in sales tax from like the service industry's down, but the goods and commodities is kind of carrying it and picked back up. But the long-term implications are still kind of, remain to be seen, and we don't think tourism's going to really come roaring back just yet. So the other part, so if that's the sales tax, the local share is the property taxes, and this is, in Palm Beach County and really statewide, the housing market remains incredibly strong. There's people trying to move to Florida, more people looking, I guess, now that they can work from home, or if they're trying to come to a state where there's, we're one of 7 states without a state income tax, so that's attractive. There was change in the federal tax laws a few years back that kind of really were punitive to people that pay a lot of state income tax because they no longer caught a break on their federal tax return. So that's why you hear more of like businesses and stuff from New York, whatever, moving to Palm Beach County. So that's the good news. The housing market remains strong, and in fact, the housing market is kind of booming. The downside is the commercial property, office space and small businesses and restaurants and stuff. That's what we're concerned about, really having a decline in value. Fortunately, most of our tax base is residential in Palm Beach County. It's about 73% residential. But that commercial property is a concern, and we are seeing our forecast start to slip. And that's the main reason why. We've been enjoying about a 5 to 6% increase in property values in recent years, each year. As prices go up and there's new construction. This year, going into next year, FY22, the projections fall into a 1.6% increase. So where that hurts us is we've got a voter-approved referendum for that $1 million that's paying for the teacher salary improvements, the expansion of our school police department, the mental health workers, and the choice programs. We're not going to see that set $1 million. If the property values go up 5%, we do get a 5% boost in revenue. This year it's looking like it'll go up 1.6%. And that also impacts our capital budget as well, where we have a flat 1.5 mils that we levy. So those are the areas where we do really benefit when the property values go up. So when those And we factored that into our budget when we do a 5 and 10-year capital plan. We base it on those projections, so we are going to have to, you're going to hear me talk to the board later about the capital budget's going to tighten up a little bit for next year. Okay, so at this point in the process, and this plays out every year, right? The governor's the first one to do his budget recommendation. And then the House and the Senate and the Florida legislature, they each do their own budget proposals, and then they hash it out for 60 days. And at the end, they'll do a final conference, and they come to some agreement on the budget. So the governor's budget is the first read we really get. And this year, the governor's come out with a very favorable budget recommendation. It would actually increase funding. It increased the base student allocation to $137, which would be great. The governor's budget does show, right now the state's down about 88,000 students. He's projecting about 40,000 of those kids would come back. And so he's showing a loss of 48,000. And in Palm Beach, we'd still be down about 5,100 students based on the governor's projection. And actually, I think that projection's as good as any. So what's really just positive about the governor's budget in general is that he's proposing some type of increase, right? Let alone a cut. Total funding would go up just under 3% at 2.95%. Now, the governor does get some help with this because there's 40,000 less kids in the state, right? So that's $320 million he doesn't have to pay for anymore. So that takes some of the pressure off. But the bigger challenge is the governor's budget, when you look at the whole thing for the whole state, it grows about $4 billion. And like I said, the state is struggling with a reported $2 billion decline in revenue. So it's not clear how the governor's budget would really balance. How do you come up with the $4 billion, or really you have to come up with $6 billion to make that work? And then just what I wanted to point out was, while the governor's budget is by far, it's the best case scenario, this is the high water mark, I would be pleased to get this budget. Even with the governor's budget, because we had that decline of 5,000 kids, you can see our revenue there, the red $7 million negative, we'd still actually be down in revenue next year because that enrollment loss I spoke about earlier. And then we've got some, we take that a step further and say, okay, if this is the governor's budget, then we can say, okay, that would be our revenue. What do we know about, what kind of rising costs do we know we're going to deal with? And one of the big ones, again, this year is the FRS. You may recall last year, the district, we had to ante up another $15.5 million on behalf of our employees for their pension benefit in the FRS. And that was reflected a 1.5% increase in the employer contribution rate. There was no change for the employee. That stays 3%. But this has been a recent trend, and we're expecting to see another increase this year. And this is tied to really the health of the pension fund. And they did an actuarial study a few years back, and the actuaries concluded that the state's assumptions on their investments was too aggressive. The state was assuming they'd get 7.4% on all their investments. And they have to do these projection models that go out, like 100 years. And the actuaries came back and said 7.4 is too high. You should be at like 6.5 or 6%. And, if you just think about your own, 401k or your own investments, it's pretty hard to just bank on, I'm going to get 7.4% for the next 50 years, right? Especially if you're trying to invest it in something that's safe. So what the legislature's been doing is trying to work towards that goal of reducing that assumed rate of return. And last year they reduced it from 7.4 to 7.2. That small little change in the investment rate cost school districts across the state $233 million. It cost the state agencies statewide about $400 million. And this year we're expecting to go down probably another 0.2. So we expect we'll get hit for basically another $15 million here in Palm Beach. Now, it is up to the legislature to do this. The current proposal out of the Senate only takes like a half a step. So instead of increasing the employer's share 1.5%, it proposes 0.75% on average, which for us would be more like probably about $8 million. But anyway, we're going to have to see what happens with that, but we're definitely going to have an increase. Part of me hopes that they'd go ahead and do the right thing and go another 1.5%, because I think for the long-term benefit, for those of us that are counting on our pension funds, we want it to be solvent. And, even though that comes with a cost, what I'd like to, ideally what they would do is, reduce that rate and then give us enough money in the base student allocation to pay for it, so it doesn't become another budget challenge. So anyway, we factored that in. We've got, some other things. We've got our textbook budget. We have to do a language arts adoption this year, and those are always the most expensive, and we have to change out all the English books, and that's going to cost about $2 million more than the state provides us through our textbook categorical funding. The raises that we're negotiating now for those groups that are on a January calendar, part of that carries over into next year. So anyway, bottom line, when we take the governor's budget and we do our best to say, what does that mean for the schools here in Palm Beach County, we'd be short about $12 million. Now, $12 million is, that's a significant number, but it's manageable. Our operating budget's $2.2 billion, so we would work to get that balance, and I think we could do it without too much pain. But again, what's kind of scary here is this is under the governor's proposal, and his is by far the most generous. And I put a quote up there by another member of the legislature, the House Appropriations chairperson, Jay Trumbull out of Panama City, and his take was that, it is mathematically impossible to cut $2 billion out of this budget without taking anything from education. So that's the other side of it, right? And that's what we're going to have to see how it plays out. You got the governor trying to do the right thing by education. Now, is he just doing that to look like a good guy, or is it really feasible? Can the legislature find a way to make that happen? So what I suspect is you're going to see House and Senate budget proposals that are dealing with the state shortfall and making reductions where they need to make them, which could, spells bad news for us, basically. And then just a couple more slides if you bear with me. So just looking ahead at the challenges, again, for this year, the board has said, look, we were able to give the teachers a 3.5% raise overall for the veterans. We took advantage of the state money to really increase our starting salary, and the board felt like it had been a tough year on all the employee groups, and they wanted to be consistent. So we've been, going around getting deals with everyone else for 3.5%, which is actually better than what we've done the previous 5 years, where our deals average 5%. I know PBA was able to work things out because you had a unique situation there where most of you, a good number of your department were new hires, so we were able to kind of leverage the money and focus it on the experienced personnel. But that's moved on. But when you look at next year, and just to help manage expectations going into next year, I really think like this year's raise might be it for a while because of that enrollment and then the potential state budget cuts. And so we're worried about state budget cuts. I've mentioned the FRS. The cost of COVID is still there. I'm hoping, as the vaccine gets more widely distributed, we'll spend less on all these, on PPE and enhanced cleanings and all that. But some of it's going to continue into next year. We did mention, I think at a previous session, that pending charter school referendum appeal on our, on our millage levy that could cost us, if we lose that case, it's about $22 million a year. And the one good news thing I can end on is, there's been another round of federal stimulus dollars approved. It was approved in late December, and that's probably what's going to help save the day a little bit next year. And let me just talk about that real quick. So there's been now 2 rounds of stimulus. We had the first round of about $40 million. That's spent. That's in the rearview mirror. And then the next round was approved in December, and it was about 4 times the size of the first round. So this is significant money. And the Palm Beach County share is about $173 million. We have not received these dollars yet. The state has not released them. About $19 million of that's going to pass through to charter schools, which will leave us with about $154 million. But what these dollars are really designed to do is help children recover from the learning loss that's taken place during this pandemic. And the federal money is allocated for 2 years, so I really see those dollars helping us with the FY22 and FY23 budget. So what I'm looking at here is, I said, okay, after the charter schools get their share, that leaves our schools about $154 million. We should start thinking in terms of 2 years. That would give us $77 million a year for 2 years. And I'm working closely with the superintendent and the deputy superintendent and our chief academic officer on, what is it that our students need to recover. And we've done some local testing and diagnostics, and what's really kind of concerning is that the kids are falling behind by and large. We've got over 50,000 kids that are significantly behind in both English and math. And then if you look at just English or math by itself, you got over 70,000 kids in each category and that's against our total enrollment district schools of roughly 170,000 kids. So we've got over 30% of our kids that are behind in both categories, and the amount of learning loss is significant. One illustration was that there was some research that came out and said, well, the average kid due to COVID-19 is now about 6 months behind. So I said, okay, what would it take to provide tutoring services to catch up 6 months of lost instruction? And it was paying our teachers at the tutorial rate of $25 an hour, which is a bargain, and assuming they could all tutor 20 kids at a time, it would still cost you $164 million. So I share that just because when these federal dollars come out, and we're hearing this a little bit in Tallahassee, some people say, schools don't need this money, or it's a windfall, or there was a representative Fine out Brevard who said it was an avalanche of funding and that COVID's been the best economic boost for schools ever. That's really simply not true. We've had a lot of costs related to COVID, and we're going to have some long-term consequences that are going to have to be addressed. So we're starting to add tutorial programs. We're going to beef up our summer school program. But the real answer from the academic experts is there's no quick fix. Like, there's not a silver bullet to just fix this overnight. It's going to take like a sustained effort for at least the next 2 years to provide kids, some tutorial. It's probably going to be a combination of things. We're going to need kids probably to get some small group instruction where a teacher can sit down with a little kid and help them learn to read and sound out words and things like that. So it's going to be expensive, and that's why I share that. So the stimulus money, I don't think we'll have any trouble spending it. The money does need to go to certain things. So, the state's not going to let me take the federal stimulus money next year and put it towards employee raises. We're going to have to show them what we're doing to really improve the student performance and get kids caught back up and on grade level. There is talk of another round of stimulus that's, President Biden's American Rescue Plan, which would be terrific, and we'll see how that shakes out. Some thought is that money is going to be big enough to really start dealing with some infrastructure challenges. Some of the schools around the country are crumbling. One of the things that came out of COVID is the opportunity maybe to improve ventilation within school buildings, which gets very expensive. So, I don't know too much about that one yet, but there is talk of maybe another round of stimulus, and we would certainly welcome that. And then the one thing I just like to close with, because we meet with our legislative delegation, and everyone's will like to tout what they're doing for education, but the bottom line in Florida is we are 46 in the country in terms of funding per student. We have slipped. Since 2007, we have slipped from 36 in the country to 46 in the country. And we're heading in the wrong direction, And part of that, what's really driven this is there's been a priority of tax cuts over investing in education in our state. We've had over 20 years of Republican governors, and that's the bottom line when it comes down to it. Like when we went through the recession, they could have raised taxes to maybe offset some of that. They didn't. They shifted taxes. They took money out of our capital tax rate and shifted to the operating budget temporarily, and then they turned around and cut the operating millage when the property values came back. And you may have heard me talk about the required local effort before. That's our biggest chunk of local revenue, and that's what the legislature sets that tax rate for the school board. So the school board, when they approve the tax rates, their hands are tied. They're basically told, this is the tax rate you must approve. And what they've done is they've rolled back that tax rate in recent years. And that was something that actually started when Commissioner Corcoran was Speaker of the House. He said anything otherwise is a tax increase, and we're not going to be part of a tax increase. So that's what I really attribute this continued decline in our national rank is because of this commitment to cut taxes. And why that impacts you guys is, PBA and the police department, you're part of a bigger family here with the school district, and we are, our revenue comes through this state funding formula where you have the legislature setting our tax rates. And I bring that up because it's a different situation when you look at the county or city governments. The county has kept their tax rate the same. It's been, I think, 4.78 mils for at least 8 years, maybe 10 years. And so when the property values go up in Palm Beach County, they bring in more revenue. They're not forced to roll their tax rate back. And that allows them to, provide salary increases. It allows them to, be able to try to entertain increases to the sheriff's budget. And the cities see the same thing, as if they've got a strong tax base. Now, there are some cities that they're at their millage cap, and they may not have the benefit of, the strong tax base. We've got some communities that just, are a little more challenged financially. But by and large, that's the big difference between a municipal or county government versus a school district in the state of Florida. So that's why you're probably, you hear us coming in every year kind of going through this whole budget scenario and what the legislature's doing to us, because they really control our revenue. And I think that's the end of this presentation. You guys have probably had enough, but I'm happy to take any more questions or talk about it. So.
You said that there were fewer kids enrolled, but services were not being cut back. So which services were you referring to?
So I said this year we have not laid off any personnel. That was part of those executive orders as well, and the stimulus money with an eye on protecting jobs. So,
Were
there
you
was
just referring to like staffing?
yes,
Okay.
yes, staffing. But there's some services we provide too. We have contracted like mental health services, and the demand for those has increased. But I will say, so the one thing I forgot to mention, tomorrow we're sending out school budgets for next year.
Mm-hmm.
So schools like to get their budgets early so they can start planning. And, they got to build their schedules, build their staffing plans. So those budgets are going out tomorrow, and they're going to reflect the reality of fewer students. And we're going to be eliminating over 300 positions from our school budgets. Now, we've got 23,000 employees, and we have enough turnover every year. I believe we can manage that. There will not be layoffs, but that schools are going to be feeling the impact of having fewer kids. And, some of the positions and support staff they have now are not going to be in next year's budget. And that's just because we can't ignore the loss of enrollment any longer. And there's no provision. No one's even talking in Tallahassee about trying to continue to fund us based on our past enrollment. It's going to true up next year.
When do you get this new federal stimulus money?
So that depends on when the state releases it, and that seems to be moving kind of slow. I think the state's really looking at, making those funds available for the next school year, FY22.
The money for the charter schools, the $22 million per year,
Yes.
and we would have to pay them back how many years if we
the-
lost this lawsuit?
So the referendum was a 4-year deal. We're in our second year of it. And we're well into the second year. We're not sure if we lose the appeal. Then it's in the court's discretion if it's retroactive to the start of the referendum, or potentially they could consider the harm that would do and say, no, this is maybe going forward starting next year. I don't know, but the risk there is, that referendum is generating over $200 million a year. If we lose this lawsuit, we have to give the charter schools their share based on their enrollment, which is about 11%. So that's how I get to the $22 million a year. And if they say, and you got to go back to the beginning, then at this point, we'd owe them $45 million. And then we'd also then have to plan our next 2 budget years, assuming that, $22 million that goes.
So Russ, for 4 years, it'd be $188 million, roughly.
Yeah, it
So,
probably, and if there's any growth in the tax roll, it could be as much as $200 million.
So will we pay that in advance?
No, we'll have to abide by whatever the court ruled.
So we haven't really technically lost anything yet.
No, we haven't.
So they would give you that, you haven't spent any of that money yet either.
I've spent it all. That's the problem. We've spent it all on doing exactly what we told the voters we would do. We provided the teacher those salary retention supplements, $10,000 if you have 10 years or more experience. So that money is all spent. That's what's really scary about it. If we lose this lawsuit, we got to go back and find, dig that money out someplace else and then plan for it going forward.
So wouldn't it be smart just to put that money aside now? I don't see why would we spend if we're going to lose it, if possibly lose it?
Well, we won the first lawsuit. We won the first appeal. I felt like the law was on our side, and we made a commitment to the voters. That money is paying for a mental health professional in every school. It's paying for a lot of the expansion of the police department. No, I don't really have the luxury to just set that kind of money aside.
Do they have a date to rehear it when they sit?
I haven't heard the date. It's a very strange thing, you know, as a lawyer, you're looking at it going, what is this? Because the appellate court already heard it. And then all of a sudden, they decided to reconsider and hear it en banc with everybody, with all the judges present, rather than just the small group that had heard the appeal before. It's already been heard. We're going to have to do it again. And the vote was very close the first time, but we prevailed. That's why it feels kind of like, and I hate to say it, but it feels like it's a fix, that it's already been determined what the outcome's going to be, and that the charter schools are going to get the money. Because I've never heard of a lawsuit that's done this before, where the appeal was already heard. We won the appeal rather than them having to take it up further to another court or something. No, the appellate court's going to hear it a second time with all the judges present. So that's why it kind of feels, I think it was like a 3-4 vote or something like that.
No, I think it was just 2 to 1.
The 2 to 1. Okay,
It was a 3-panel.
Yeah, they sometimes do that, but has it been set yet? Or
It was the dissent. There was one dissenting judge that then pushed for this en banc review and petitioned the other judges to join them. So now it's going to be, I think, 12 judges hearing
Right.
it. Hopefully, hopefully they'll see it the right way. But it's a contentious issue, and it's kind of a political issue too. And I just hope that the political powers don't bleed into the judicial system. But judges are appointed, so it's a concern.
If we do lose that for some reason, are the teachers still going to be receiving their $10,000?
We're going to have to renegotiate
Yeah, I would have
that with
to.
them.
It'll be big news. Trust me, if we lose this, and then it's going to, it'll be a set of dominoes that goes off, and we will have to come back to the board and deal with it. But I would say everything would be on the table at that point.
So you all are releasing your budget for the next year tomorrow?
Just the school portion. And the schools know they're tentative, but we try to get the best budget in front of them. And, they are, like I said, they're feeling the impact of the decline in enrollment, and that's hard enough. We didn't make any cuts on top of that.
And they need sufficient time to be able to build their master boards to determine, which classes they're going to offer to the kids, like at a high school level, which classes are they going to be able to offer, so that the kids then, when they fill out those forms of what classes they want to take, they already have that idea in mind, without giving them hope that we're going to be able to have, a Latin class where we're not going to be able to fund that. So that's one of the reasons why we released that early.
Okay. Do you guys have any other questions? No? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to just proceed through the articles? I think I only tweaked a few different things, and just to give you kind of an idea of our initial stance on what you all proposed last time around. I gave you 2 copies of our CBA. It's pretty much the same as our proposals as last time. I just added a few different things.
Okay.
For Article 6, union business, on the outline there, I have all of our open articles. But for Article 6, union business, I know that we added some examples of vacancies, and I think that our members wanted kind of an exact specification of where the vacancies will be posted. I know that you all said that you kind of post them online more so than using the bulletin board these days, so I don't know if you could specify where you post them online.
Well, if you go on our website, there's a careers tab, and you go on the careers, and it has all the job postings. You can click on that, and then they can maneuver through that system with careers, and you click on it, and then there's search functions where you can go and look and see, if you're looking for a school resource officer, if it's a dispatch, then you would know, if you know the job code, that's the best way to search it. But if you don't know the job code, you can do keyword search, and it'll pull up those jobs.
So maybe we can reference the career tab's website then. Has there been any issue with finding that? Do you know?
We're talking about 2 different things based on your response, Vicki. What we're speaking about is communicating within the department from the higher-ups when there are vacancies in certain units. For example, I see like the Criminal Investigation Division, Professional Standards, K-9, et cetera. Also, we would like to include that in, if there's any vacancy at the school-based sites. So that's what we were making reference to in this.
So do you want to keep the bulletin board, or?
Transfers is more or less what we're, you know, within the department, not new positions that are just being formed.
Special assignments.
Special assignments.
Yeah, do both. Okay, so I think that they would be interested in doing both, the bulletin board and online. Okay, and then also 6.3, that's we left as is, and then 6.6. I know that there was a concern with exemptions for law enforcement, and I looked it up, and I believe it's just addresses and telephone numbers, so I changed it to names and employee email addresses. And then I also took out work locations to comply with the exemptions.
Okay.
And then everything else pretty much the same. 17, Article 17, work week and overtime. I wasn't involved in the last bargaining session, but I know that there was talk, I think the last time around, about the seniority wheel. So I think that there was some sort of discussion or understanding that they would bring that back in a general order, but that was never done. So they would really just like to put it back in the CBA about the seniority wheel, including for extra duty details. Is that right? Yeah, so basically I used the same exact language that used to be in the CBA for the agreement to establish a joint study committee for that seniority wheel.
You could actually take out that, establish a joint committee, because that was already done, so just keep the, you know.
So a committee's already in place.
It was already in place, it was already created, and the outcome came out to the actual seniority wheel that was already implemented, and should still be implemented and used, which occasionally it's not.
Okay. So we can change the language to that
Yeah,
effect, just
correct, yeah.
basically, to be in practice.
Correct.
Okay. And then everything is basically as is. I know we still have the 5% for the wages, but we can talk on that. If we can talk on the other things, I know that our members are just completely opposed to getting rid of the career ladder. So I don't know if you spoke to the chief about that.
No, we haven't, our position hasn't really changed much, so we were looking, one, to provide you with the budget to see if your understanding of kind of where we are financially made any changes to your proposal before you came back with anything concrete.
Well, I think we would be willing to work on the general wage increase, but they are not gonna, the career ladder is something that's been in place for a long time, and it's very valued and beneficial to our members, so.
We were also going to get a estimate on the savings by all these cuts that he wanted to make.
Right, well.
Did we get that?
Well, when we went through and listed all of the, what we call asks, with monetary asks out of the contract, it was an incredibly lengthy list. We gave that to the staff to work on, but it's still going to be a little while before we can get all those numbers, because it's not just Mike pulling it from his team, it's Mark Mitchell pulling some from his team, Burton Road Shoulders doing some of the work from school police's aspect, so it's pulling it from a multitude of places while people are still trying to continue their regular work. So it is still, the ask has been put out there to see how much it would cost.
So we don't even really know then if there's an actual savings then.
No, we don't right now, so we're pulling it.
Why would we want to cut it then?
Well, we're in negotiations to talk about it.
Right
now, we're trying to find out like the monetary amount for the asks that you have done, and we'll pull up what the cost savings are, because I'm sure that they've done those cost analysis, they just haven't been shared with me. That's why they would propose that from school police. So we will get all that information from them. We wanted it to be a comprehensive, detailed report of this is what our proposal costs, this is what your proposal costs, and figure out where we are from there, because there are things that we can negotiate of, but we need to understand, we can't just negotiate the language without understanding how much the cost is.
I have a question. You said the other unions already settled, correct?
Correct.
Out of the other unions, the largest one being the CTA, how much did they give back? How much did the district ask them to give back in funds?
We only negotiated monetary. They agreed
Okay.
to do, well, let me continue. They had a full book open, just like you do. They chose to do salary only, so we did salary only.
Okay, so they
There
gave,
are a lot
they
of
gave nothing
language
back.
asks that we have proposed that were pulled off the table in the interest of getting them the raise. A lot of the unions did the same thing, just because they know, given the budget outlook, that there could come a time where this was a really bad idea to give the raises. So they wanted to get the money in their employees' pockets as soon as possible, in case the budget came back with something that was not beneficial to the district. So there are things in their contracts that we will be looking at going forward as opportunities to find additional cost savings that will impact their unit in the least egregious way possible. But as Mr. Burke said, if the worst comes to pass that we think may come to pass, we don't want to lay off people. That is our key focus, is to maintaining jobs. So we will have to look at all of the contracts to see are there cost savings that will impact the least amount of people possible, but save the most jobs.
For 20.4, the non-contract day compensation, did I understand that correctly, that you all just want to change that to straight overtime pay?
It's either straight time or overtime pay, depending on how many hours the officers worked. It's a very confusing system to have these non-contract days versus contract days. We've had arbitrations over it before. It's hard to explain to an arbitrator. It's hard sometimes for the officers to understand, well, is this a non-contract or is it contract? So you would have, for leases, would have that set amount, but there wouldn't be these non-contract days for the unit anymore. They would just either be straight or overtime.
But right now, you always get paid the hourly rate for non-contract days.
No, they get for non-contract, they get that non-contract rate.
Right.
For some officers, it's for the more veteran officers, it's less. For the newer officers, they're making more than their usual rate.
Mm-hmm.
Which you're making more anyway if you don't work 40 hours, you're not getting, with non-contract pay, you're still going to get the additional pay. If you're working less than 40 hours, you're going to get straight pay instead of either contract pay or overtime.
No. It's never going to be straight pay on non-contract.
With overtime instead of non-contract.
It'll either be,
Right.
Okay.
it'll either be non-contract or time and a half.
Okay.
Did you have any responses to any of our, other than the monetary, any of our proposals? Did you speak about that with the chief?
We've had some brief discussions, but not that I'm willing to discuss today.
Do you know when we'll be ready to talk about all
When
that?
we can set another date for negotiations in the next week or two, and hopefully we'll have a lot of the information that you're asking for. But I'm gonna check with the team first to see how much more time they need to pull the information together.
Okay. And I just want to reiterate, we're completely opposed to, changing the discipline and the grievance articles
And a just cause.
in the just cause, yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted, to mention one thing. The 20.7, the performance-based pay, which is referred to as 165 pay, that the district was looking to remove that from our contract. Our members were rather upset by this because what they're focusing on was, and I'll summarize it, the loss of the 165 money, which is $100,000 a year, the career ladder, where many officers receive incentives because of their experience or areas of expertise. This is something that it's not just given to them. And additionally, obviously, at a smaller level, the canine officers losing money for the more than one dog. So it gives the appearance that the district is trying to balance its checkbooks on the backs of the people, and the working men and women, employees at the school sites. You know, in our case, which would be police officers at the schools and who are doing the job we were hired to do. It's a very strong sentiment amongst our people, because obviously we're mandated by law to have an officer, which Palm Beach County is going to, adhering to at each school site. Is sometimes, even when the agency I came in, they had to look within. They had to cut money, so they looked within. So my officers were like, some of them were very upset, saying, why don't they look within to cut the fat? So I'm just bringing their sentiment forward for everyone's information.
Understood.
I did speak to members of the canine, and a lot of them were very upset at this proposal because a lot of them have had their dogs for multiple years, and I think only a few of them have more than one dog, and they're trained with the dog. The dog responds specifically to them. So
Right, and see, that's kind of the problem, is that the dogs only respond to them. The dog has to stay with them, and if they have two dogs that do two different roles, we still have to find somebody else to have another dog to do those roles. Because if Kevin has two dogs, and one is a gun sniff and one is a dog, or a drug sniff, and they've got two issues on two different sides of the county, Kevin can only go to one. So we have to have another officer with another dog to be able to go to that other spot. So that's kind of an issue. I don't think it was in anything that they ever, it was one of those unintended consequences that we found out, like, well, wait a minute, this can't function that way. You know, maybe that's something where we grandfather people in, but we don't want it to be an incentive for people to, and it's not meant to hurt anybody, it's just that we can't incentivize people to have more than one canine when we have to have another dog anyway.
because some of these dogs are 6 or 7 years old too. So
Understood. So that would be something we could talk about, maybe grandfathering those people who already have the extra supplement and is on a go-forward basis, not incentivize that.
What doesn't make sense to me is the officers don't get to just say, I want a dog, and just grab a dog. The officers are assigned a dog to the department
No, I
and
understand that.
management.
And like,
So
that's,
if management made a poor choice of giving these officers two dogs to a burden that they have to take care of, and now they want to take money away from them for grooming and taking care of those dogs, it's ridiculous.
oh,
We're talking about,
Mr.
we're
Lopez, I'm
talking
not sure
about-
you actually
Can
heard what I
finish,
just
please?
said.
Can I finish, though?
Sure.
I get it, but it's just the fact that they're bringing it up to affect two people, possibly two people in this department that have a second dog that was given to them by the department. They didn't have a choice of getting a second dog. They were given that dog. And now they're trying to take away a measly $2,400 or less than that. It's ridiculous. I just wanted to bring that out.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it up, but it sounds like you didn't really hear what I was saying before, is that we're talking on possibly on a go-forward basis. We don't want to incentivize this because and I don't feel like anybody made a mistake. I think it was done with all the best intentions, but we feel like now there is a problem, we want to fix it.
I understand. So the problem gets...
Yeah, if it was, as you just stated in the contract, in your proposal, written as such, it would have been easier for people to swallow.
Well, these are negotiations, so let me explain. When we negotiate, we bring proposals to the table, you tell us what your response is to it, and in some cases we can make adjustments, some cases we won't. But that's part of the negotiation process. We're not going to bring our best offer to the table on day one, because then we can't move.
Right.
So, and I'm sure you feel the same way. I know that there are some proposals you brought forward that you know we can't accept.
I
so.
did want to talk about one of our new proposed articles, the master police officer, because this does involve an annual supplemental compensation, but I just wanted to make it known that I think Kevin did speak about this with either the chief or the assistant chief, so
Yes.
it was something
No,
that he was
we understand
receptive
that, and appreciate you bringing that one forward, because that was something we had been discussing with the chief. When we went over the proposals, it wasn't part of that, but it is something that the chief was interested in doing, so we appreciate that you put the language in there.
Any results or response from the insurance question that was brought up about the blanket policy, looking into a blanket policy for the officers to buy into the insurance?
We talked about this last time. That was not something we were interested in doing, and I didn't see that in your proposals.
It was something that you agreed you personally agreed that you were gonna get the information and bring it back to the table next
We
time.
would talk to you about it. What, from my understanding, is that Risk was not interested in that. I'll go back to them again and see if their position has changed.
And then, as far as, I just wanted to bring this to light, the General Order 2020.0014, because I think you all proposed to change to make it, not, in the CBA, I think now it says you get first come, first served for your school or zone for a detail there, but this order was in October 2020, and it establishes the hierarchy for, it goes sector, zone, and then everyone. So we just want the CBA to comply, to correspond with that.
Right, and I understand that. But as I said before, this was a request. The changes that we've made have been made at the request of management. If they have decided they would like to change the general order, then maybe that's where we're going with that. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, because this is fairly recent, I think, that you all met.
That was,
Okay, and I understand. I just want to make it clear. We do not
I
make
get
changes
that.
to the CBA without consent or at the direction of.
I'm just voicing
Management.
our position.
No, I appreciate that.
Maybe since Chief Weiner can explain that to us then. Why? what
Okay,
the
we can
reasoning
ask for
that.
Chief Weiner to come, or he can,
He's right there.
I understand.
Yeah,
that.
I'm online. So just restate your question.
What was the reasoning for the change in the off-duty hiring practices?
So we're running into problems with some officers not wanting to take assignments, and it was slowing down the allocation of personnel to those details. And so we wanted to refine the process so that we would have a more efficient way of filling those where officers were not interested in filling them locally.
When you said the word "we," as you know, I've been in high school, like 13 years. I never have a problem filling it, and I don't mean to be a wise guy. When you said "we," is that departmental overtime? That the department was experiencing difficulty in having people volunteer?
It was the department, not every situation. So if you've had good experiences with filling your details, that's great, but that wasn't the case across the district.
Okay.
I know right now that there is, because of the reduced sporting activities and extracurricular activities, especially at the high school, less availability. So we have a hard time comprehending that there's people out there who don't want to work. I'm going to put Mike on the spot. You're at a high school too. Do you have any?
I have not, and just the contrary, I have people calling me every day asking me if I have any assignments. Every single day.
And additionally, by going by the proposal, it actually is a detriment to the school-based when you have the activities. I'll use where me and Mike had the discussion because where he works, the municipality, the town that he's in. It's very good to have. We have parents who have kids students at different levels. So when you have somebody there at a football game, and you have from my sector, which is all in Jupiter, and you have officers from your elementary school, middle school, and me at the high school, there is a great chance that some parents coming there are going to know us and have familiarity with us. So I think that's really beneficial to maintain that. I know that we can't please everybody, but that was the reasoning behind the way that operation order was put together. But obviously we're at negotiation, so we're open to discussing that.
I think we would be open to reviewing that again, but you have to understand that some of the objectives that we have in search of achieving is efficiency of the process. So we have to be assured that it'll happen efficiently. And so we can take another look at that. I don't think that's something that we're set on without the opportunity to negotiate.
Okay. Well, we gave you an outline pretty much of our initial kind of thoughts. They're not TAs, but it kind of shows where we stand on everything. So I don't know how far we'll get today if you don't really have a position on our proposals yet, so.
So what we would like to do, I don't know that there are changes in every article that need to be done, so if you would be in agreement, any articles, and Darnice would be working on this, any article that neither of us have made a request to, if we could bring that to the table next time and TA those to get those off to the side. so
That
as we-
neither of us have opened.
Right.
Yeah, that
neither-
should be fine.
Okay. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll set another meeting and we can go over, hopefully have the cost proposals, and we can give you a full, robust presentation of our response to your proposals.
Okay. You guys good? Yep, okay. All right.
All right,
thank
so
you.
we'll try and get that on your calendar.
Yeah, I'll get back
Okay.
to you with some dates.
All right, thank you, and you
Thank
guys
you.
have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.
You too.
Yeah.